unfunded gimmicks and not top trump numbers. As Russia has so effectively proven, there is no point having parade ground armies, mass ranks of men and machines, if they cannot be integrated as a single full-spectrum force, sustained in the field under all demands of modern warfighting. That takes professional forces, well-equipped and rapidly adaptable, supported by critical enablers and vast stockpiles of munitions. And that is why, in this document, you won't find shiny new announcement, comms-led policy-driving, unsustainable force designs, or any major new platforms for military enthusiasts to put up on their charts of the bedroom wall. We stand by the command paper that we published in 2021, but we must get there faster, doing defence differently and getting ourselves onto a campaign footing to protect the nation and help it prosper. As I said, standing here when DCP 21 was announced, we owe it to the men and women of our armed forces to make policy reality, and the work was just beginning. So in this refresh, we have focused on how to drive the lessons of Ukraine into our core business, on how to recover the warfighting resilience needed to generate credible conventional deterrence. And the great advantage of having served in defence for some time is that my ministerial team and I have now taken a proper look under the bonnet. Consequently, we are clear that our strategic advantage derives from four key sources which require urgent prioritisation. First and foremost, our first-class people. Our men and women are not just brave and committed, but talented and incredibly skilled. They are our real battle-winning capability. And it is our duty to ensure that they are well supported, prepared and equipped as possible. So we're going to invest in them. Last year, I commissioned Richard Haythornthwaite to conduct the first review of workforce incentivisation for almost 30 years. It's such good work that we are incorporating the response into our command paper, and I'm today unveiling a new employment model and skills framework for our armed forces. It will offer our people a spectrum of service that allows far greater career flexibility, making it easier for military personnel to zigzag between different roles, whether regular or reserve, or between the civil service and industry. We are transforming our forces overall, employment offer, to make sure by adopting a total reward approach to provide a much more compelling and competitive incentive package. And since all our armed forces personnel deserve the best quality accommodation, we are injecting a further £400 million to improve our service accommodation in the next 2 years. Many of us over Christmas would have been frustrated by the support our service personnel and the families receive from those tasked with looking after their accommodation. It is for that reason I have withheld their profit and used the money to freeze for 1 year only the rent increases our personnel were due to pay. Taken together, alongside such initiatives as wraparound childcare, they are intended to enrich careers and enhance the ability of our most talented people to keep protecting the British people and to ensure they are rewarded and fulfilled while they do so. Our second priority is further strengthening our scientific and technological base. We are already world leaders in specific areas, but to continue outmatching our adversaries, we must stay ahead in the curve in digital, in data and in emerging scientific fields. In 2021, we said we would invest £6.6 billion in advanced research and development. In fact, we are now investing significantly more to stay ahead in the technologies proving themselves vital on the battlefields of Ukraine, such as AI, quantum and robotics. And we are enabling a culture of innovation across defence, pulling through those R&D breakthroughs to the front line. Following in Ukraine's footsteps, we are increasing sourcing those £100 solutions that can stop 100 million threats in their track, winning both the kinetic and economic exchange of modern warfare. Of course, our ability to do that depends on the quality of our relationship with the industry, which is our third priority. I'm pushing the MOD to form a closer alliance with our industrial partners. A genuine partnership to sustain our defence will mean doing things differently. Ukraine reminds us that time waits for no one. It's no good holding out for the 100% solution that is obsolete by the time it's launched. 80% is often good enough, especially if it means swiftly putting kit into the hands of our service personnel, capabilities that can be rapidly upgraded, spiral developed, for the relentless cycles of battlefield adoption to win the innovation battle. And instead of sticking to acquisition programs that drag on for decades, we're setting maximum delivery periods, 5 years for hardware and 3 years for digital programs. Our fourth priority is productivity and campaigning. In order to face this increasingly contested and volatile world, we need to make major changes to the machinery of the department and its methods. We are emphasising an ethos focused ruthlessly on the delivery of real-world effect, increasing the bang for buck in everything we do. This approach reaches into every part of the defence enterprise, from the front line to the back office, and involves a major redesign of the Department of State. We must shift our whole organisational culture away from the previous peacetime mentality to one where we live and operate as we would fight, focusing more on outputs than inputs and achieving a better balance between risk and reward. That means empowering people to live and operate alongside partners and sometimes to be enabled by them when in lower threat environments. That means ensuring our equipment, whether Type 31, Challenger 3 or Typhoons, has the infrastructure and supplies needed to sustain operations more of the time and deliver a real-world effect wherever and whenever it's needed. And it means working with the relevant regulatory authorities, for example, the Military Aviation Authority, to accelerate the experimentation, testing and innovation of new technologies while remaining within legal bounds. But I want to emphasise one final aspect of the command paper refresh, namely the development of a global campaigning approach. We started with a review of our head office, where we had broken out campaign delivery from policy formation and have established integrated campaign teams. They have adversary, not geographic focuses, and will drive our enduring campaigns in the same way operational commanders lead our forces on deployed operations. And the indivisibility of operational theatres in today's world means defence must constantly be ready to respond globally to safeguard our interest and those of our allies. Sometimes it will be to evacuate our citizens in moments of crisis like Sudan. Other times it will be to deter an adversary or reassure a friend. And as we've shown through our support for Ukraine, the UK government has the political will, not only the political will, but that only matters if it's only matched by the military agility. So today we are establishing a Defence's global response force. Ready, integrated and lethal, it will be better cohere existing forces from across land, sea and air, space and cyber to get there first in response to unpredictable events around the world. Crucially, today's paper also recognises that it is in the interconnected world the UK is unlikely to act alone. Partnership are critical to our security and prosperity. So in future, we will be allied by design and national by exception. Our support for NATO will remain ironclad, but we will continue to prioritise our core relationships. We will invest in deepening relationships with our new partners. It is why we invested to expand our global defence network, improving their communications and coordinating defence attachés within our intelligence functions. None of this is headline-grabbing stuff, but it is the fine details that makes a difference to our national security. To conclude, I'd like to add that paper is the result of having several years in department and has understood where it needs most attention. For the continuity in office is improving, and I'm incredibly grateful to the long-serving Minister of the Armed Forces, Mr. Heapy, whose experience in uniform and public office has provided the basis for this paper. And we are grateful to the hundreds of individuals and groups who contributed to the first challenge phase of its drafting, from academics to serving personnel to industry representatives, not to mention the many members of this House, most of what we have learnt from you encapsulated in this document. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, this is likely to be one of my last appearances at this dispatch box. It's been the greatest privilege to have served as Secretary of State for Defence for the last 4 years. I want to thank my team, civil servants, special advisers and members of this House for their support and their challenge. All of us here have the common interest of defending this fine country, its values and its freedoms. All of the many functions of government, of all of them, defence is the most important and more important than ever, as the next 10 years will be more unstable and insecure. The men and women of our armed forces are second to none, and Britain's place in the world is anchored in their professionalism and sacrifice. I believe we will increasingly call upon them in the years ahead. We must ensure they are ready to answer that call. I wish them and whoever replaces me well. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, John Healey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. And can I thank the Defence Secretary for the advanced draft copy of his statement and welcome some elements that he announced today that weren't in that draft copy, like the improved childcare package and the rent freeze for armed forces personnel. Madam Deputy Speaker, following the Defence Secretary's decision to stand down, I want to start by paying tribute to his time in this House. He's a political survivor. I remember his first job in 2010 was PPS to Ken Clarke. And for the last 4 years, he's been a dedicated Defence Secretary. And I want in particular to recognise his work on Ukraine and that of the Armed Forces Minister. His decisions on sending military support to Ukraine, on getting other nations to do more, on declassifying intelligence, have all been beneficial for Ukraine and for Britain. Today, the Defence Secretary is presenting his plan for the future of the British Armed Forces at a time, as he's told the House this afternoon, when we have, and I quote, the return of major war to the continent of Europe alongside growing threats elsewhere in the world. As his own future is now short, how long is the shelf life of his plan? Industry and military leaders can't be sure his successor will agree with his decisions, will accept his cuts, will act on his approach. And they can't be sure how the Strategic Defence Review planned both by his party and mine after the next election will reboot defence planning. It didn't have to be this way. Labour wanted this to be the nation's defence plan, not the plan of current Conservative defence ministers. We offered to work with the government on a plan to make Britain secure at home and strong abroad. This is not such a plan. This is not a good enough response to war in Europe. To accelerate support for Ukraine, to fulfil in full our NATO obligations, to halt the hollowing out of our forces, to renew the nation's moral contract with those who serve and the families who support them. Why has this plan been so delayed? It's 510 days since Putin shattered European security. Since then, 26 other NATO nations have rebooted defence plans and budgets. In the time it's taken the Defence Secretary to produce this long-trailed new defence strategy, Finland carried out its own review, overturned decades of non-alignment, increased defence spending by 36%, applied to join NATO, saw its application approved by 30 parliaments before last week's NATO summit in Vilnius. And that successful NATO summit has made the alliance stronger and support for Ukraine greater. We fully back NATO's new regional plans and the G7 long-term security commitments to Ukraine. And if UK military aid is accelerated in the coming days and weeks, this will also have Labour's fullest support. Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a welcome back to basics in this plan, a focus on stockpiles, on training, on service conditions and more combat readiness. But it is clear that this plan is driven by costs, not by threats. It's driven by the real cut in day-to-day Ardell spending the Defence Secretary agreed in November 2020, and by the failure to secure the 8 billion extra he said was needed in the spring budget just to cover inflation. Where's the halt to further cuts in the army, while NATO plan an 8-fold increase in its high readiness forces? Where's the commitment to fulfil in full our NATO obligations? Where's the action plan for military support to Ukraine first promised by the Defence Secretary in August last year? Where's the programme to reverse record low levels of satisfaction with service life? And where's the full-scale reform of a broken defence procurement system that the Defence Select Committee called for on the very day the Defence Secretary announced he's stepping down? In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's hard to see what has changed in what he's announced today. The £6.6 billion for defence R&D was promised in the Integrated Review 2021. The Global Response Force and force-level cuts were announced in his Defence Command Paper 2021, and the Strategic Reserve was recommended by Lord Lancaster in 2021. So, as he steps down, as the Conservatives' longest-serving Defence Secretary, will he accept that many of the biggest challenges are being left to the next Defence Secretary and to the next government? And as we may not see him again at this dispatch box, can I, on behalf of all sides of the House, wish him well in his post-parliamentary career?
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his kind comments. Unfortunately for him, I will be here tomorrow doing a statement. My actual last statement will be tomorrow. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, look, I understand what he's saying. And Madam Speaker, this is the refresh of the Defence Command Paper. It was not a complete redrawing of an SDSR in those periodic ways that we've all done so many times, and so many times they've all been published under both governments, both parties, and so many times they have not had the real funding attached to them. And we get to the end of the SDSR period, and so many times of all the governments, Labour or Conservative, Madam Speaker, with black holes, with unspent, with overspends, time and time again. This is a report to make us match fit, to make sure that whether we get 3%, 2.5%, 2% of GDP, these are the reforms required to, in my view, and hopefully my successor's view, face the threats we face in the growing decade ahead, and also to reflect the lessons we have seen in Ukraine. The Right Honourable Member mentions Finland, for example, in its defence review. He will know that in Finland and Swedish parliaments, they periodically have a fixed in Parliament, in schedule, a review. It is always going to be. What they do is they ask their committee in Parliament to do the review, and then they hand it to the Ministry of Defence to implement. That is their process. It wasn't triggered by anything specific, and it's not a benchmark that they did it before I did this refresh, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been predicted and profiled. But what I can say is, way before Sweden and Finland joined NATO, I was the architect of the security pact between the UK and Sweden and Finland from last January, because I recognise that they are our friends and our allies, and while they weren't in NATO, it was inconceivable that we as Britain would never come to their aid should a more aggressive Putin attack them. And that was the beginning of the process of developing that strong relationship with them. The Right Honourable Gentleman talks about the defence procurement, and I've read my Right Honourable friend's report, and I want to thank him for it. Many of the things in it we are now doing, and I want to say, obviously, give credit to him for his report, but some of them have also been my observations. Observations around SROs, observations around 75%, about 50%, observations around a spiral development cost, observations you've heard from this dispatch box about gold plating and overspecking that has too often driven prices through the roof, and a cumbersome thing. And for the colleagues opposite who are, Madam Speaker, heckling, who have been ministers in this department, they will know that of all the departments to serve in, this is not a department that moves at the greatest speed of reform. It takes time. And you only have to look at record of every single one of the ministers in this House, former ministers, to know how hard it is. It doesn't undermine their contribution. It doesn't make them lesser ministers. But as a department of 220,000 people, a department that seeks every authority through a ministerial chair, it is not, and I've served in a number of ministries, the department that is the quickest to change. And no doubt the Right Honourable Gentleman, if he succeeds in his ambition to be the next or the one after Secretary of State for Defence, if he succeeds, he will learn that all too well. And what I promise him, as I would promise my successor, is I will not come to this House and pretend the problems they are dealing with weren't made the week before. They were made 20, 10, 15 years before. That is the actual truth of many of the policies and procurement challenges that we deal with in this department. I believe this paper will last the test of time because it's about facing the threat, Madam Deputy Speaker, and that's the answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For the record, we are about to lose one of the best Defence Secretaries we have ever had. He will be sorely missed in this House and in the department. He knows we have indeed discussed what's wrong with defence procurement on many occasions. And he knows the Public Accounts Committee and the Defence Committee have published a number of reports saying it's broken, the most recent of which, entitled "It is broke and it's time to fix it," only came out on Sunday. On Tuesday, we get the DCP refresh, whose acquisition strategy effectively accepts some of the 22 recommendations in our report within 48 hours, which I humbly submit, Madam Deputy Speaker, is some kind of world record for a Select Committee report. But the proof of the pudding's in the eating. So can I, in all seriousness, encourage the Defence Secretary, when he does his handover to whoever succeeds him, accompanied by his excellent team of junior ministers, to please impress upon his successor, we really do need to bring about this reform, not just for industry, not just for our armed forces, but for the whole security and defence of the realm. And with that, we wish him well.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just to thank my right honourable friend for his work in his report and his campaigning, what I would say is procurement has started to improve. It has absolutely. In 2009-10, the average time delay on a project was 28%. It's now 15%. The average cost overrun was 15% on a project in 2010-29. It is now 4%. The direction of travel is improving. The number of civil servants at DNS went from 24,000 to 11,000. So cutting away the bureaucracy, and the direction of travel is improving. And in my time, Madam Deputy Speaker, as Secretary of State for Defence, I also was determined to put to bed some of those problem projects that we were all inheriting. I'm pleased to say that as I speak, Ajax is back on track, is starting to be delivered to the units. The units are starting to train in them now. We can all have a discussion about whether we would have chosen Ajax all those years ago, but fundamentally, it's not cost the taxpayer any more money, it's being delivered to our front line. And I was determined to put that right, or take other steps to deal with it. That should always be the case. And the other thing, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I've always tried to do, and isn't in here, but I recommend in defence procurement, is never defer, either delete or deliver. If you defer, it costs hundreds of millions of pounds. Deferring the aircraft carrier cost £1 billion under the Labour government. Deferring the F-35 cost £500 million. Deferrals create the black holes. Delete or deliver, but don't defer.
SNP spokesperson Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd also thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of a draft statement, albeit there were one or two additions on delivery. I'd also, although it seems perhaps preemptively, join in wishing him well in whatever comes next. I know I haven't directly shadowed him, but I would certainly pass on those thoughts from my colleague from Angus, who I know has worked closely with him over a period now. I do welcome, and I'll start in a positive, welcome a number of the points made in here, and I certainly welcome the fact that people are put front and centre. I think that absolutely is critical in anything that we're doing in terms of defence. Our people are what make it work, and if we're not supporting the men and women of the forces, then what are we doing at all? So I very much welcome that. I think there is probably more we can do, even beyond this, and I think while it won't surprise ministers to hear me say that while we need to support those serving, we need to also continue to look at what we do in terms of supporting our veterans as well. And I know that the Minister is working on this, but it's an area that we do continue need to try to do more. I also welcome the fact that there's a recognition of some of the accommodation conditions. I welcome the fact that steps are being taken and matters are being looked at, but I do think that needs to be moved further at a greater pace. I note that the Secretary of State says we're going to spend over $50 billion for the first time next year. I'm wondering if you can tell us how much of that's simply down to inflation created by this government. Not trying to be awkward here, but that is clearly going to be quite a significant factor. We've also heard of the ongoing and long-lasting issues around procurement, with reports showing that roughly £2 billion is wasted each year in failed equipment programmes and cancelled procurement contracts. Is it the case that the MOD, making the reforms needed to make procedures better, will it deliver value for money? Madam Deputy Speaker, we have seen issues flagged in terms of retention and retainment, and the Haythorn review clearly highlighted those. Is he confident that the steps being taken now in terms of the skills agenda will take the necessary actions to address recruitment and retention issues? And in terms, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, of cyber capability, the Haythorn review again highlighted that as a major issue. Is he confident that the steps being taken and outlined today will do enough to deliver that capability in a way that we'd all want to see it?
Secretary of State.
Madam Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman and for his party support on Ukraine. I am very grateful for that. On the Haytham Rate Review and the skills, right across Europe and the West, we are seeing recruitment challenges in its military. I was with my New Zealand counterpart recently and my Canadian, and they too have a challenge. A skill shortage across society is big, and it's no different in the armed forces, and that's why we have to adapt and rapidly change to some of the challenges. Now, on procurement, as I said, the figures have started to improve. Yes, there are challenges. We can debate a whole day here on the reasons for some of those challenges. Complex procurement is not as straightforward, I think, as many people think, and he will know from the Scottish Government's procurement issues it's not very straightforward to deal with. But I certainly believe that if you invest in the people and you are prepared to invest in continuity, and one of the points about the SROs, the people that help manage our projects, instead of having them here today, gone tomorrow, we make sure they're there for the long term and link their incentives to success, then I think we will have a better chance at delivering better value for money.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I express my admiration for my right honourable friend's dedicated and distinguished service as Defence Secretary, and it's a sad commentary on the state of the special relationship that our American ally did not recognise his suitability to be the next Secretary General of NATO. Now, he will remember that successive defence committees, well before the invasion of Ukraine, argued that defence expenditure should never have been allowed to fall below 3% of GDP, and the present Chancellor of the Exchequer, when he was standing for the leadership in 2019, even expressed the wish that it should be at 4% of GDP, which would have taken us back to the Cold War percentage of between 4 and 5.1% of GDP on defence. My question for my right honourable friend, therefore, is in what way does this refresh actually allow defence to have the potential to expand quickly if that extra money is belatedly made available?
Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and you know, long before I was doing this job, he was campaigning for defence to be properly apportioned the funding it deserved to keep this country safe, and I want to pay tribute to that. It's been many years you have fought, the right honourable member has fought for that. In order to make sure that should there be an increase of funding, and I severely hope there will be, I seriously hope there will be, for defence based on the 2.5% pledge of our Prime Minister, that skills, if we invest in our specialties and our skills, we can expand our armed forces when a threat increases. Finding a way to hold those skills on the books, even if they are rarely used, is why it is important to develop a single Armed Forces Act. Currently, we have legislation that says if you want to join the reserves from the regulars, you have to leave the regulars and you have to join a separate legal entity, the reserves. That prevents soldiers going backwards and forwards and people being mobilised in the way we want. We want to introduce a single Armed Forces Act, and we think that will help do that. So the skills is at the core. The second thing is the investment here in rapid procurement, the ability to keep a headroom in the budget to respond to the latest threat as the adversary changes. And thirdly, making sure we invest in sustainability and enablers, because there is really no point in having all those frontline vehicles if you can't get anywhere.
John Speller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I know it's considered bad form to speak ill of the dead, even the politically dead. But quite frankly, that contribution was pretty thin and full of cliches, and fundamentally an admission of failure of 13 years of continuous cuts by this government. Let me take just one example, which is touched on in the report. It was clear from Allied exercises that in any major conflict, we would not only we would run out of artillery munitions within a week, and the Ukraine invasion reinforced that. So why has it taken till this month for the Secretary of State to sign the contract to actually replace those artillery shells?
Well,
Secretary of State.
very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, the honourable gentleman, right honourable, would actually understand sometimes the supply chain has to be reinvigorated. When we placed an order for the N-Law anti-tank weapon, It turned out the optics had been stopped being made 10 years before. You can ring up all you like and try and place an order the next day, but until the manufacturers source the supply chain, it's not going to happen. But what I did do was I made sure I placed the order in the United Kingdom, in the north of England and in Wales. That factory will start producing 155 shells. I've given them a long-term contract and £500 million to start supplying our forces. And by the way, the stockpiles of our ammunition started depleting around about 1997, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Ford. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank him for his clarity, his calmness, his wisdom and his fortitude? We will miss him. It's very clear that the tectonic plates of geopolitics have changed and they've made the world a much more dangerous place for countries like the United Kingdom and others who believe in freedom and democracy. How will his new global response force help us and our allies to be able to react more quickly, more nimbly when crises do arise? Because we know they will.
Secretary of State.
Well, one of the important lessons of Ukraine is make sure they're digitally glued together, make sure that the command and control is not as vulnerable as they used to be, so have a lot in the rear, as we say, a long way away, maybe thousands of miles away, part of their command and control, with only their headquarters forward. Make sure you invest in the enablers to move them around the world or the continent or wherever you need to be. That will help them. The Global Response Force at the moment, the provisional layout of them is a light brigade and 16-air assault brigade to be put in it, supported by a logistical and support brigade, and that will give us a whole range of opportunities, including meeting our NATO commitment, but should we wish to do something else with it, to be able to deliver.
Kevin Robinson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I, as the Defence spokesperson for the DUP and as Deputy Leader of the party, thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his honourable and gallant service to our armed forces. As the Member of Parliament for East Belfast, thank him for the reinvigoration he has given to shipbuilding in our country and the support for Harlan the Wolf. Thank him for the commitment he has shown to Talis and the NLAW and the utility that has proven in Ukraine. And as a member of the Defence Select Committee, thank him for utilising our subcommittee's report on soft power and the benefits I see in his statement of defence attachés and engaging them more thoroughly and appropriately with the intelligence network. We have this document today and we can see that it builds upon and augments the refresh. But in recognising the 4 years well served, does he believe that this document will give not only our armed forces the best chance to embrace the future, but leave a lasting legacy for the positive contribution that he has made?
Secretary of State.
The Honourable Gentleman, look, this is really about making sure that the framework and the we're match fit for any expansion and the future. It's also about investing in some of those holes, such as the restockpiling, making sure we are spending over time $2 billion and then another $2 billion over time to make sure that our stockpiles are back where they should be, and in fact even more money as well to do that. That will be good news for the likes of Talis and NLAW in Belfast. It will be good news for those factories in Washington and North Wales for the 155s. It will be good news for our industrial base like MBDA in Stevenage and Bolton. It will all be about investing in our sovereign supply chain and at the same time making sure that we are sometimes making the difference not in the obvious but in the behind the scenes that makes an armed forces so ready.
John Barron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I commend my right honourable friend for the service and dedication he's given as Secretary of State and wish him well for the future. He will know, as a fellow infantryman, that sometimes there is no substitute for having boots on the ground if one wants to command that ground. What assurance can he give, given that the 1922 Defence Committee produced a paper concerned about hollowing out, as he knows, a paper we submitted to the Defence Command paper refresh, that this hollowing out is going to stop, cuts to the army in particular is going to stop? And what assurance can he give that not only will it stop, but actually it may leave scope to build on those numbers, because at the end of the day, an army of 72,000 and falling is simply not large enough given our commitments.
Secretary of State.
We can argue about size quite a lot. What we have to make sure is whatever we put in the field is properly equipped, properly enabled, and is effectively 360. That's really, really important. And therefore, we have to be honest about the size of the envelope of our defence budget. There's no point pretending we can have huge numbers if we don't have a defence budget that matches that. And I have been determined all the way through that this is not purely about a numbers game. And I know my right honourable friend gets that. And many of his suggestions were incorporated into this command paper, because we think the lessons of Ukraine do show, yes, you need infantry and tanks, but you can also dominate the ground sometimes without even being there. The proliferation of cheap drones, the use of highly accurate artillery allows fewer people to cover more area or to dominate more area. I went to see a frontline command in Ukraine at a corps level. That corps commander had nearly 1,000 UASs at his disposal every day, cheap ones. At any one time, he may have 80 or 90 up in the air in feeds. That it gives him the ability to dominate ground without mass necessarily. In the end, you do obviously have to take it, and I get that, but let's make sure that the people that take that ground are properly protected and equipped so they can hold it. Otherwise, as we see in the Russian forces, they take the ground and then they're all killed.
Kevan Jones.
Can I first of all thank the Secretary of State for his service. I think he and I have known each other for 20 plus years, and I know he's always been a strong advocate for defence. He said in his statement that he got a 10% increase from 2019 for the defence budget. What he fails to tell the House is also some of the problems with he faces is the 16% cut that was instituted from 2010 to 2019 in the defence budget. The command paper says that the first priority is obviously homeland defence and our NATO commitments. It also announces a new global response force. Can I ask the Secretary of State how to commit to both doing those well? We can do it without actually a substantial increase in the defence budget.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend's comments. He'll be glad to know that in 2006, Madam Deputy Speaker, we both went to Washington to lobby for something called ITAR waiver. We are very close to getting it. And that's my point about if you think this department is quick and easy, you know, I had hair, Madam Deputy Speaker, I had hair when we were doing it. So one of the things I'll be proud about is whether we get this ISTAR waiver over the line. It is possible to have a global response force and to dedicate it to NATO, but also NATO is not always. The way we allocate our NATO forces is we give them to the NATO Supreme Allied Commander Europe, but they are able to be used elsewhere unless he calls on it. That's often how we do it. And so it is perfectly possible to have a global response force and elements of it elsewhere if it's not called upon by the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. Of course, absolutely true to this House and everyone else in this House, if NATO calls on it because there is an Article 5 or even something else, that will be the priority. Our forces, more often than not, are absolutely dedicated to NATO and the security of Europe.
Bob Seeley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for his impressive no-nonsense leadership. And it's always great to see a Minister who knows his brief so well. My question, it's been 12 years since the Levine report gave greater powers to single services, but we're now moving in the opposite direction, and greater integration, full spectrum effects, hybrid war, joint effects, call it what you will, linking up the military, but also military and non-state and the tools of other tools of state power. Does the Secretary of State think that Levine is still fit for purpose, and what would he recommend this House and his department do about it?
My honourable friend makes a really important observation about Levine. Now, I don't think Levine is now fit for today. I think there are parts of Levine that have not worked. I do not see the TLBs or the Army, Navy and Air Force take that responsibility. We hope they would do when their programmes don't work. And therefore, I think examining, perhaps moving joint force design back to the centre, where these things will be at the core of the MOD, will be important. I also think in other parts of Levine, it is really important to make sure that the centre does have a role in the holding to account our armed forces. In the command paper, there is a commitment to start reviewing that process itself.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I place on record my thanks to the Secretary of State for his service? And as you will know, where I've agreed with him, I've said so, not least in the work he's done supporting Ukraine. But I'm afraid one of maybe his biggest legacy was the fact that he agreed to and oversaw a huge cut of 10,000 in the armed forces, in the army, which I believe seriously weakens our armed forces. But can I just check, Madam Deputy Speaker, just on a question? Just test whether this is more than warm words, because on page 89 it says we will step up our efforts to deliver an integrated missile defence approach. When will that happen?
Secretary of State.
I'm just looking up page 89. To counter these threats, we will step our efforts to deliver an integrated air and missile defence approach. Yes, not only are we doing that across NATO, integrated with NATO and working with the Germans and indeed the French, we are starting that already. We've signed up to the process. We're starting it now. So by last month, we have started the process of examining what Europe and NATO needs to have the right integrated air defence to protect its territory. Right? The start point is to find out what we need. There's no point us rushing out and buying long-range air defence missiles if it can all be the long range can be done from a ship in the Channel. There's no point rushing out and buying very short range if we're not deploying from our bases in Tidworth. So first of all, the overall survey of what needs to be done, we've already started doing it. Secondly, we've started investing in our next generation of GBAD, our medium-range air defence capability, and we have recognised that we are short of our long-range air defence capability by investing. We're already doing it. I don't know where the honourable member's been for the last 2 years, Madam Deputy Speaker, but if he actually paid attention to it, he would realise we've started investing in the extended range missile for the Type 45. We've started increasing the number of batteries of our GBAD. We've also managed to export our GBAD to Poland for a £2 billion export deal. So we have started it, but the first thing to do is recognise that we put together the right profile of air defence, because as he will know, it is layered, and therefore we have to get the right layers. If you don't get the right layers, you look like some of those countries such as Russia who just buy big profile things that can't actually talk to each other, and then they get whacked.
Check the Presti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by thanking my honourable friend for his service and his leadership? And could I ask if there's anything in this command paper which addresses the barriers and the bureaucracy which is hindering Ukrainian defence manufacturers and British defence manufacturers from collaborating effectively together, because such collaboration can help the Ukrainians liberate their country and enhance our own capability and our supply chain.
There is certainly a very odd thing that I observe in the department. In our Kindred, which is our operation to gift and support Ukraine, I see a procurement speed and delivery that I cannot understand why it can't be normal for us, right? And then I see our procurement in parallel. Now, some of that is about assurances, Madam Deputy Speaker. If we're going to fly drones over people in this country, we require much higher levels of assurances. The Civil Aviation Authority, etc., absolutely require it. When you're in war, some of those levels can drop. So some of it is simply that. But other areas, it is one of the lessons we are looking at right now through D&S to try and understand how we can bring that into our main procurement and delivery.
Barry Ship.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Defence, Secretary of State for Defence, knows that I'm not a defence expert, but I have a great interest in defence. I was born the same week as the worst bombing of London, not far from here, on a day very close to the day this place was bombed. And my father served in the last war. But can I say that I have watched him over the years that he's been in this house. I've got a lot of regard for him. We've become quite good friends, which we're allowed to across parties in this house still. He's not perfect, but can I just say to him today, I have been a consistent critic of the fact of going below 100,000 men in our army. You know, a long track record. But he is a better Secretary of State Defence than many I've seen at those benches. But does he realise that we are not daft on this? What has gone on? A Prime Minister and a government could allow a man of his stature as a Defence Secretary to go at the critical time when there's a war in Europe, all hell is breaking out on our planet, and we lose a good Defence Secretary. What's happened with the Prime Minister and a little clique round him?
First of all, can I just thank Honourable Dunn for his very kind comments. I have always liked both sparring and discussing defence with him, and it is important that for many of us in this House, across the House, defence, we understand, is a core function of this government, a government. It's not a discretionary spend stuck on the end. It is ultimately the core responsibility of a government. And I know, come the next election, that the battleground between these two front benches will probably not see defence in it. We all know it, and many of us around this House who have campaigned for more defence will know it will come down to schools and hospitals and and transport and everything else. And the casualty of that is often defence, and we stop making the case to our citizens and our constituents why it is important. And I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman who always reminds people on this side, and certainly under the previous leadership of his party, of the importance of that defence. Look, I have a fantastic team. I think there is plenty of amazing civil servants, military leaders and everyone else who will do just fine without me in this job. And it won't. President Lincoln said the cemetery is full of indispensable men.
Lick Drummond.
My right honourable friend too, and I am extremely disappointed he's stepping down because he has been an excellent Defence Secretary. As my right honourable friend says, people at the centre of our armed forces, so this refresh with its focus on people is welcome. Rick Haythornthwaite's report makes some excellent recommendations, so I'm very pleased that the Defence Command paper reflects this. Then can my right honourable friend confirm that accommodation is an absolute priority, because that's the biggest thing that every single member of the armed forces brings up when we go and visit?
Secretary of State.
It absolutely is, and you heard me say I've taken the profit from those companies. I note as a Defence Secretary, I think I've nationalised more things than any previous Defence Secretary, so maybe I'm putting up a job interview on the opposite side. But it is absolutely looking after our people, and you know, I was determined that if these companies could not provide the service, then why should our people take that hit? An extra 400 million to go into it, and some of us will have seen, obviously, the legal test we have tried on Annington Homes to make sure we try and re-franchise issues. It's all very important. We can't give the people that work for us that skills, that future, and indeed that lifestyle that they deserve, then they won't be joining us. So it's really, really important.
Stephen Farry.
I want to start by recognising the leadership of the Secretary of State over Ukraine and the wider threat from Russia. Earlier he made reference to the growing range of threats across the globe and how the UK often has to respond to those. Could I invite him to also go a step further and reflect upon how the MOD can work with other departments in Whitehall, and how the UK can work with its international partners around early intervention and prevention, and understand the drivers of conflict, for example, gross human rights abuses, climate change, and the lack of international aid, and see how we can actually get ahead of the curve in some situations.
Secretary of State.
The original Defence Command paper absolutely built on that. And if we couple resilience building of nations such as, sadly, as we can see the case of Mali, for example, if we can get in early enough, help them with security, complement aid, complement work in counter-radicalisation and education and poverty prevention, if we can get in early enough, we can help prevent those conflicts. And one of the messages I give to the Treasury is that small amount of investment saves you a lot of money further along. The CSSF, the funding, sort of Foreign Office, MOD funding, is a really good piece of work where we often fund a whole range of issues that deal with that. And I'm very happy to write to the honourable gentleman to give him details of that fund.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for Defence for his regular visits to David Brown Santasalo Gears in Huddersfield, in my constituency, which are in the supply chain for the Type 26 frigates, also for our submarines, and also providing world-leading gearboxes for our armoured vehicles and for our tanks as well. And does he agree with me the importance of having resilient regional supply chains to deliver the equipment we need to tackle changing global threats?
Secretary of State.
Yes, absolutely, and I was delighted to visit David Brown. It is the famous David Brown of the Aston Martin, David Brown, in Huddersfield. And when you go there, you realise not only the importance of keeping the skill base going, but making sure you have a clear pipeline of orders and pathways to incentivise those companies to invest in the next generation of machinery, because if they don't feel incentivised, they will not invest. And when we need them at a time of war, there simply won't be anything there. Or as I said about some of the rearming of our stockpiles, re-stimulating the supply chain takes years and years. It's incredibly important. It's also important to recognise that the aerospace industry is pan-United Kingdom. It's right across the United Kingdom. It is everywhere. And people don't often realise that it is not just in Lancashire, where I represent. It is in mill towns. It is in Scotland, in Wales. It's all over the place. And it really does help. A defence pound helps British economy and secures British jobs right across the United Kingdom, including in Northern Ireland.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Because the Secretary of State is a thoughtful man and has today announced that we're going to be spending £50 billion on defence at a time when every other government department is under pressure financially. He has also said that he predicts that this country will be at war within 7 years. Does he have any idea or process to bring about more peace in the world, more rapprochement in the world, less of a military threat in the world, or are we going to go on year by year increasing expenditure on defence and being involved in potentially more and more military conflicts? Does he have any idea different to that?
Secretary of State.
Look, the honourable gentleman knows me fairly well. We had once spent a nice week in Iran together. With me and the then member of Blackburn. I was the most pro-European of the three, I remember, on that trip. But I'm not out looking for war, right? We are all out here trying to defend our nation by avoiding war. But you do not avoid war by not investing in deterrence. You have to invest in sometimes hard power to complement soft power. We don't want to use it, we don't go looking for it, and I know the right honourable gentleman mixes with some people who always think this is about warmongering or war. It's not. But if you aren't taken seriously by your adversary, it is one of the quickest ways to provoke a war.
Anthony Mangnall.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I congratulate the Honourable Gentleman, the Defence Secretary, for an extraordinary 4 years in which he has done his duty above and beyond, and he will be sorely missed. Can I welcome this refresh, and particularly the points he makes around the global campaign and how it might complement aid, but in regard to our service personnel who do so much for us in the field of conflict, can I just ask how we might recognise them under the concept of what he's talking about in terms of campaigning? When they are away for extended periods of time, what is the Ministry of Defence going to do to ensure that they are recognised for the extraordinary service that they do?
Our men and women are motivated by lots of things, and the state often shows its appreciation not only when they're serving by the sort of X factor, the wraparound, but also by medallic recognition. One of the things that it has taken quite a long time in my tenure is the creation, and I'm still waiting for the final approvals by those medal committees, for something called the Wider Campaign Medal, to recognise people's contribution to a campaign that keeps us safe. A good example of that could be the continuous at-sea deterrent. It is an enduring campaign. The thing about campaigns that reflect modern war is not everyone is in the front line. People hundreds of miles away are contributing to keeping us safe, and they sometimes need to be recognised, not just the person pulling the trigger or storming the bunker. It goes all the way back. In today's military, the pyramid is very big and very deep, and hopefully a wider campaign medal will recognise that.
Stephen Doughty.
Deputy Speaker, and I'd pay my own tribute to the Secretary of State's service and also thank him for the personal courtesies he and indeed his officials have shown me on a number of occasions. The Secretary of State has been rightly focused during this time on the major geopolitical threats and risks to our own security and that of our allies. But he will also know the importance of watching the flanks and rears, and whether it's the Western Balkans, whether it's the Sahel that he mentioned, whether it's space, whether it's the polar regions, and whether it's the non-geographical domains in cyber and AI and those issues. He knows that the range of threats and the diversity of those threats is increasing. Is he absolutely convinced, given all of that, that we've got it right on the number of personnel? Because I simply do not think that I have no doubt about the capacity and the commitment of our troops in all of those areas and all those capacities, but the numbers are simply not there to deliver on that diversity and range of threats.
Well, Secretary of State.
The honourable gentleman actually agree with that as threat rises, we should respond and we should design our forces to meet whatever the threat is of the day. Do I think 73,000 is enough to meet today's threat? I do. But do I think defence needs a greater share of public spending? Yes. That's what the Chancellor said in the autumn statement. Do I think we need 2.5% of GDP? Yes, it's what I've campaigned for. It's what I've achieved. I haven't got a timeline, but I'm in that direction. And should we get the extra money, what's important about this is preparing us to have a range of choices depending on the threats of the moment. The army will still be over 100,000. My right honourable friend from Billericay raised the challenge. I have instructed that the army's modernisation requires us to protect their budget until they are modernised. They are behind the other two services, and we will continue to do so. But I do think they are currently configured aside. But do I say never about making them bigger? I think we should always be prepared to change our forces as the threat changed.
James Sunderland.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I please thank the Defence Secretary for his statement and also his fantastic service over many years. Given the current tempo of commitments faced by HM forces worldwide, I am clear, as a former capability planner, that quantity has a quality of its own. It is also incumbent upon the MOD to fulfil all of the expectations placed upon it, both by our NATO allies and by our own defence tasks. So could I please ask the Defence Secretary, post the refresh, whether he can confirm that the MOD remains committed to a fully deployable, scalable and sustainable armoured division at readiness?
Secretary of State.
Yes, we are committed to that, but we've also been honest about the time in the decade to get to being able to do that.
Tonya Antoniazzi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, our forces' families are made to live in damp, mouldy service accommodation with broken boilers. Now, the Secretary of State spoke in his statement about rent freezes, but well over 4,300 troops already don't pay rent because their accommodation is so bad. He said there would be no unfunded gimmicks. So is the 400 million in 2 years funding for service accommodation, is it new money, Secretary of State, or is it from existing budgets and commitments?
Secretary of State.
It is, we have taken, listen to the Honourable Lady opposite, for example, we have taken money that was allocated elsewhere and we've decided that that is more of a priority, is to make sure that those houses are in a better state than they can be. We have a housing stock that goes back many, many years and is a challenge. One of the challenges I have is I unfortunately have to pay almost £20,000 a house to a PFI project that Gordon Brown signed us up to, even when those houses are empty.
Scott Benton.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I commend the leadership of my right honourable friend over the last 4 years, not just in terms of our response to the war in Ukraine, but also in securing a record financial settlement from the Treasury. I welcome the new employment model and skills framework. Is he able to outline how he thinks this will further facilitate collaboration with employers such as BAE Systems on the Fylde Coast and offer new opportunities for recruitment and retention?
Secretary of State.
Defence recognises, as does the defence industry, that skills are really important. I spent a great afternoon about 2 weeks ago up at Samlesbury in the National Cyber Force with FE colleges from around Lancashire, from Blackburn, from Bolton and Manchester, all coming to bring young people amazing opportunities. They came from not just Greater Manchester and Lancashire, recognising that we invest young, we get the skills we need. It's absolutely the case. Without the skills, defence will be starved of the oxygen we need to do our job.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I, first of all, can I also wish the Secretary of State well and thank him for all he's done. And whilst I welcome the £2.5 billion additional investment in stockpiles and the improvements to readiness, the Secretary of State will know that unless we have highly trained service personnel in place to use them, then they are useless. In the refreshed document that they were referring to today, it says people are most important asset. In relation to people, UK now has the lowest number of soldiers since the Napoleonic War, which I think is quite dramatic when you realise that. So will the Secretary of State strategise to increase our strength in numbers to recruit young and capable people who want to honourably defend this great nation, the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland? I sat in a plane yesterday with a guy from Belfast. He's 20-year-old. He signed up to the army for 25 years. He wants a future. Can we give him that?
That young man will have an excellent future in the armed forces for as long as he wishes to stay. What I would also say is, look, the army is still recruiting. Okay, it's not that we've just all stopped everything. The army is still recruiting, and also, what is very important to remember that we need to embrace our reserves. We have talked about it for a long time, but we haven't done it. So the Single Armed Forces Act will help us do that. So the Army will be over 100,000, of which 73,000 will be regulars. But I absolutely believe that the reforms in today will make sure we are scalable should we wish to increase it. But whatever we do, and whatever parties in this House come with pledges in the next election, ask yourself whether it's just about funding people, or will we be funding their equipment and their vehicles and their houses and their barracks to go along them with them, because we cannot just have people without any of that. Otherwise, we condemn them to a pretty miserable time, unprotected on the battlefield.
Margaret Ferrier.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Defence Secretary for his statement, and he has been an outstanding Defence Secretary, and I wish him all the best for the future. I'm aware that soldiers should soon be able to easily transfer between each of the three services as well as into the civil service under the new Defence Command Paper. What steps are ministers taking to ensure that the civil service is a more attractive option for talented personnel than the private sector?
Secretary of State.
I think there's definitely a leaf to take out of the civil service for the military. You know, I look at how civil servants can flex and do some step up, step down, and take breaks or sabbaticals in the senior civil service, and I think, why can't we do that for our military? Why can't people, if their life circumstances change, why can't they step up or step down? And that's what we're trying to do with these changes in the Haythornthwaite regime as well. And I think if we do that, we will match the demands of Generation Z. You know, the younger generation are wanting more and more different things, not just whether they work in defence, it's whether they work in the civil service or whether they work in the private sector. And all employers have a challenge in how they're going to do that and keep people longer so they get investment both ways into their businesses or whatever.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement. I believe he said he might be returning tomorrow. Well, as I've got a lot of ministers here, I do want to just take the opportunity to say how important it is that there aren't any announcements made in statements that have not been previously given to the opposition. And if just in case I'm not in the chair tomorrow, I would like to take this opportunity to wish the Secretary of State well in whatever he decides to do next. We now move on to the next statement. Minister Johnny Mercer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In March, I updated the members of this House on Afghan resettlement and relocation. To date, around 24,600 individuals have been brought to safety in the UK from Afghanistan, including some British nationals and their families, as well as Afghans who loyally served the United Kingdom and others identified as vulnerable and at risk. I am proud that our generous offer has ensured that all those relocated through safe and legal routes have been able to access the vital health, education and employment support they need to integrate into our society, including English language training for those who need it. On top of this, we have also ensured that all arrivals have had the immediate right to work, as well as access to the benefits system. In my last update, I made it clear that this government does not consider it acceptable that at the time, around 8,000 Afghans were still living in temporary bridging accommodation, preventing them from putting down roots in communities and building self-sufficient lives in this country. Around half of this number had been living in a hotel for more than 1 year. It was time to ask our Afghan friends to find their own accommodation with the support of this government and integrate into British society. The status quo is not fair to taxpayers, and crucially, it is not fair to Afghans. Since March, we have issued legal notices to quit and individualised communications to households living in hotels and service apartments, setting out when their access to taxpayer-funded bridging accommodation will end. Residents have received at least 3 months' notice to make arrangements to leave their hotel or service apartments and clear guidance on the support they can access to help them find their own accommodation. Alongside this, we have significantly stepped up our support for those in bridging accommodation and to local authorities, backed by £285 million of funding to speed up moves into settled homes. We have ensured that enhanced multidisciplinary case working teams have been present in every bridging hotel and service department, working closely with households to help them navigate the pathway to find their own private rented accommodation. For local authorities, this funding includes over £7,000 per Afghan individual to enable
military in the US military in Korea have already confirmed that this was something that the individual did without authorization, crossed into North Korea. He was told he's been identified as Travis King, private second class. Now, questions that are being answered in the Pentagon as we speak and beyond is he may have entered North Korea willingly, but does he still wish to be there? Is he a hostage or is he a willing participant? The US military and officials have been having quite a few crisis meetings behind the scenes, not just here at the Pentagon and during Capitol more generally. This is a question that they're going to want resolved really quickly. That's fine. I don't want to interrupt. The reason being, I actually don't really because everything has changed. Right, thank you.
How many times
sorry, guys.
is it going to take?
Apologies to interrupt.
And never get it right.
Sorry. That's all right. Hey, I'm so sorry. I don't think it's what my phone actually. Oh, no, no. Sorry.
Don't forget the exclamation point at the end.
Yeah, well, I have it written down. I just don't have it written down. That's fine. Me, I mean. Right. No, you have to say. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think it's just so you don't stand there. Yeah. So, one thing I was going to say, and where's my earpiece gone? Oh, that's great. I'll just have to rewind later. One thing I was going to say is, obviously they'll be the technical design unknown here, but if they do point at me, you might just need to take short. My we'll pick them up on the floor. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah. A little higher for that. And on the other side. Take the green cable down. Pull that a little. Thank you.
It's all right. It's okay. It really is.
All right, everyone, just a reminder, make sure that your badges are off. Please silence your cell phones as well. Thank you.
I'm like, there's a briefing right now.
Just stay there.
They made them that small.
You know what? I think we're there now. My son and his wife.
Millions in December.
There'll be a handful.
And now they live in Woodbridge, so these grandkids will be close. No, one's a boy, one's a girl.
Oh, that's perfect. So they're done. They can be done.
Yeah. So just a perspective.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so at the moment I don't think I'm connected, so that's fine. Oh, no internet.
How's your week?
He's good. Yeah.
You took him to the beach?
Yes.
Still on it?
Yeah.
How did you take
He did? Well, he has no fear, so he jumped in the pool
Right.
the first day.
Good.
Naturally,
Yeah.
he can't swim.
Yeah.
But he hates the sand. He did not like the sand. he wouldn't get on the ground. I think because it's uneven, so he can walk. But he loves the water.
Okay.
He's invincible.
Yeah.
So I spent every waking moment just trying to make sure he doesn't kill himself.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yes, Ricky's a cutie.
I'll State Department first now. Huh? Oh, thank you. I'll leave it on. Thank you so much. Okay. Sorry. So they want dispatch afterwards, so yeah.
How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Didn't look as on the phone.
That was the one that had the truth in it.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here today. It is my pleasure to introduce Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley. The Secretary and Chairman will deliver opening remarks and then have time to take a few questions. Please note, I will moderate those questions and call on journalists. Given our tight schedule, I'd ask that you please limit your follow-ups to give your colleagues a chance to ask their questions, and appreciate your assistance with that. So with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Austin.
Thanks, Chris, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. We've just concluded our 14th meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, held virtually this time. And I'm especially grateful to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, for joining us again today and highlighting Ukraine's most urgent battlefield needs. I also want to thank General Milley for his leadership and his deep commitment to the self-defense of Ukraine. Now, today's meeting of the contact group comes at a critical time. We're following on the heels of a highly successful NATO summit in Vilnius last week, where many of our closest allies announced significant security packages for Ukraine's defense. And Ukraine is continuing its critical counteroffensive to regain its sovereign territory. Now, we're seeing Ukraine make progress, and Russia's losses continue to mount. The Ukrainian people have shown outstanding courage as they fight for their country. As we saw again today, this contact group stands united behind them. Today, we recommitted to supporting Ukraine during its crucial counteroffensive and for the long haul. And this is no time to slow down. The United States and our allies and partners have moved mountains to provide Ukraine with critical air defense systems, munitions, and more. And so coming out of today's meeting, I'm grateful to all of our allies and partners for their commitment and their clarity of purpose. I've asked our friends to continue to dig deep into their military stocks, because we're going to do what it takes to support Ukraine's sovereign right to live free today and for the future. Now, during today's meeting, we talked about Ukraine's ongoing requirements, including, as I've said, its urgent need for ammunition. We also discussed plans to ramp up production at both the national level and the multinational level through the European Union's important initiative to produce more ammunition. We heard from the co-leads of the F-16 training coalition, Denmark and the Netherlands. They continue to make progress on a cohesive training plan and to help some very eager Ukrainian pilots learn to fly fourth-generation aircraft. I'd like to thank Minister Poulsen and Minister Alongren for their leadership. And such initiatives clearly show that members of this contact group continue to meet Ukraine's near-term needs while also working to get Ukraine what it needs for the long term. In other words, we're going to continue to walk and chew gum at the same time. For example, Sweden and France have both signed bilateral agreements with Ukraine for defense procurements and more. And that's going to help Ukraine get even more advanced systems, and it will foster deeper cooperation going forward. And both of these agreements demonstrate our long-term focus on building up Ukraine's enduring strength. These commitments underscore how badly Putin miscalculated when he invaded Ukraine last year. 3 of his blunders are especially clear today. First, Putin thought that he could take Kyiv in days and force a new government of Russian puppets on the Ukrainian people. But Ukraine chose to fight back. The Ukrainian armed forces have defended their country with courage and skill. Second, the Kremlin bet that the world would just live with its cruel assault on Ukraine. But Russia's aggression and atrocities have shocked the world, including even Moscow's long-term partners. And that brings me to Putin's final miscalculation. He thought that Ukraine's friends would waver or flee Instead, nations of goodwill from around the world have stood up for Ukraine's sovereign right to defend itself. And by joining together, we have achieved something extraordinary. And today, this contact group stands as united and firm as ever. So make no mistake, we are determined to support Ukraine's fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And with that, let me turn it over to General Milley.
Thanks, Secretary. I appreciate that. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for being here. I want to start by thanking Secretary Austin for his unwavering commitment and leadership to the Ukrainian Defense Contact Group in support of Ukraine in their time of need. This is our 14th meeting, and month after month, Secretary Austin keeps the direction of this 50-nation-plus strong coalition focused on the strategic objectives. And I also want to express my deep appreciation to the various ministers and chiefs of defense who participated today, whose unfaltering support to Ukraine has been a beacon of solidarity since Russia began its vicious war of choice. For more than 500 days, Russia has continued their illegal war, while Ukrainians have stood strong in the face of Russia's unprovoked attacks and are an inspiration to all free nations. Russia's war of choice, Russia's war of aggression, is a frontal assault on the rules-based international order that has prevented great power war for the last 8 consecutive decades. It is not only an illegal war of aggression, it's also an unnecessary war against a country that presented no military threat to Russia. An unnecessary, unjust, illegal war of aggression for more than 500 days. And yet, the Ukrainian people have demonstrated their extraordinary determination to remain free, a freedom they have known for the last 30 years. They fight with grit and tenacity, exhibiting a profound spirit of resistance and resilience. As Ukraine continues its counteroffensive, we are reminded that real war is not war on paper. Real war is unpredictable. It's filled with fear and fog and friction. Real war is brutal. The crucible of combat has enormous costs in terms of killed, wounded, displaced persons, and refugees. And yet, despite the enormous costs, the Ukrainians are advancing steadily and deliberately, braving brutal and bloody battles to reclaim their homeland. As we publicly said weeks ago, this offensive will be slow, it'll be difficult, and it'll come at a high cost. This battle continues as the Ukrainians fight through dense minefields and obstacles, while a robust Ukrainian reserve force lies in wait to be committed at the optimal time and place of Ukrainian choosing. The Ukrainian Contact Group's assistance to Ukraine goes beyond mere words or symbolic gestures. We are committed to helping them where it matters most. Collectively, the coalition has trained 17 brigade combat teams for this offensive and more than 63,000 troops. And the United States alone has trained 15,000 of those, with more training ongoing. Training has included individual non-commissioned officers and staff training, along with artillery, air defense artillery, engineers, logistics, medical, and of course, putting it all together in combined arms maneuver at night. This training has developed tangible skills that have helped create capable Ukrainian leaders and units that are having a measurable impact on the battlefield today. The United States additionally recently announced an additional security package of up to $800 million. This latest security assistance package includes substantial provision of additional artillery munitions to include HIMARS and air defense weapons such as Patriot missiles. It also includes a broad range of artillery systems and munitions, anti-armor munitions, precision aerial munitions, demolitions, and various other supplies that are necessary to keep Ukraine in the fight. In combination, this training and equipment enables Ukraine to have the capacity and the capability to defend itself. U.S. security assistance to Ukraine now totals over $40 billion, which sends a very clear message. As President Biden, Secretary Austin, and the various heads of all the nation states in support of Ukraine at Vilnius stated, we stand firm in our ironclad commitment to provide practical support to Ukraine as it continues to defend its independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The Vilnius Summit communique said, quote, we reaffirm our unwavering solidarity with the government and the people of Ukraine in their heroic defense of their nation, their land, and our shared values. As President Biden said, quote, our commitment to Ukraine will not weaken. We will stand for liberty and freedom today, tomorrow, and for as long as it takes." End quote. Ukraine's fight is not merely a battle against an aggressive invader. It is a fight for the principles that bind us as a free world: sovereignty, self-determination, and the rule of law versus the rule of force. Today's gathering of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group underlines our global commitment. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, thank you both. We'll go to questions now. The first will go to Lita Baldor with Associated Press.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, good afternoon. As you both know, a U.S. soldier crossed the border into North Korea today after having been released from South Korea prison. Can you tell us what you know about this case right now? Are the North Koreans forcibly detaining this soldier? Are you concerned about what security breach this could represent? And for General Milley, there have been a recent increase in the number of very aggressive incidents over Syria involving Russia. What do you think has caused this? Is this a result, do you think, of the Ukraine war, pressure on Russia? And does the U.S. need to send more assets to that area?
Well, thanks, Lita. Good afternoon. Yeah, what I can confirm, and I would say up front that we're very early in this event, and so there's a lot that we're still trying to learn. But what we do know is that one of our service members who was on a tour willfully and without authorization crossed the military demarcation line. We believe that he is in DPRK custody. And so we're closely monitoring and investigating the situation and working to notify the soldiers next of kin and engaging to address this incident. In terms of my concerns, I'm absolutely foremost concerned about the welfare of our troop. And so we will remain focused on this, and again, this will develop in the next several days and hours, and we'll keep you posted. So.
And later on the Syria piece, there is a bit of an uptick, but I wouldn't overstate it too much. I think that our forces have adequate rules of engagement and authorities provided to defend themselves. And the second thing is we have a deconfliction channel. I think you're aware of that. We have a deconfliction channel that CENTCOM operates on a day-to-day basis in order to prevent any sort of incident or escalation. We're monitoring it very closely. As to the reason why the little bit of an uptick, I'm not really certain. We've got analysts trying to figure that out. I don't know if it's connected to Ukraine or not. Right now, there's nothing to suggest that it is. But we are adequately protected, and our focus is always on our own force protection.
Does the U.S. need to put more forces in that region, considering a lot have been shifted to Asia?
We've got adequate capabilities to defend ourselves.
All right, thank you. Second question will go to Idris Ali with Reuters.
Thank you. Chairman Milley, we're now entering the 5th week of the counteroffensive, sort of going into the 6th week, and you publicly have talked about, as have others in the U.S. government, about how the counteroffensive is going slower than expected. I appreciate the realities of the front lines, the mines, and the situation there, but has the counteroffensive stalled, and how is this not a failure so far? And Secretary Austin, you talked about the alliance and the contact group being together, but publicly there seems to be a bit of fraying. Defense Minister Wallace last week said that he had told his Ukrainian counterparts that, quote unquote, we are not Amazon, and that they should show some appreciation. Do you agree with the sentiments that Secretary Wallace expressed? And what exactly do the Ukrainians need to sort of break the front lines in the security zone and make the progress that you had expected them to make?
Well, first, thanks, Idris. And I'll answer first, and then the chairman can chime in. You know, we're just back from the summit in Vilnius, and what I witnessed in Vilnius was indeed unity and cohesion. In every meeting that I sat in, and so it's the same thing that I witnessed today as I talked to ministers of defense and chiefs of defense. That unity is still there. There's no question that we have provided Ukraine a lot. We, the international coalition, Ukraine is in a fight, and we have to remember that when you're in a fight, you want everything that you can get your hands on, and so that's to be expected. Ben Wallace and I have worked along with coalition partners over the last year or so on this particular issue, and Ben has done a lot to enable and to help the Ukrainian military, and so he's been a great partner. But again, I continue to see unity and cohesion. I continue to hear ministers say that we're going to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. And I heard their leaders say the same thing in Vilnius last week. This is it's about much more than just Ukraine. This is about the rules-based international order. And I think people realize that. People around the globe realize that. And, it's about the ability of a country to protect its sovereign territory. And so there is an interest across the globe, around the globe, to ensure that Ukraine can be successful in defending its sovereign territory.
So I would say a couple of things. First of all, the Russians have had several months to put in a very complex defense in depth, a linear defense in depth. It's not quite connected trench lines like World War I, but it's not dissimilar from that either. Lots of complex minefields, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, trenches, etc. They've got a very extensive security zone in depth, and then they've got at least 2, perhaps even 3 main defensive belts. So they've had a long time to prepare that. Now, they suffered a lot of casualties, the Russians did, to date. So they've also done that mobilization, from months ago. So the troops that are manning those Russian lines are poorly trained, poorly equipped. Their sustainment logistics is not high. The morale is low. And now recently, because of the Prigozhin mutiny, the command and control apparatus at the strategic level is certainly confusing at best and probably challenging in many, many other ways. At the operational and tactical level, they've had significant casualties among their officer corps. But in addition to that, the recent events of Prigozhin has also led to, and you're reporting it in the media, about various folks being replaced. So the Russian situation is not very good, even though they've been fighting a fight because of the minefields. What the Ukrainians have, though, is a significant amount of combat power not yet committed. And I will not say what's going to happen in the future, because that's going to be a Ukrainian decision as to where and when they commit their reserve, etc. Right now, they are preserving their combat power, and they are slowly and deliberately and steadily working their way through all these minefields. And it's a tough fight. It's a very difficult fight. It started about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and the various war games that were done ahead of time have predicted certain levels of advance, and that has slowed down. Why? Because that's the difference between war on paper and real war. These are real people in real machines that are out there really clearing real minefields, and they're really dying. So when that happens, units tend to slow down, and that's rightly so, in order to survive, in order to get through these minefields. So they're working their way through it. It is far from a failure, in my view. I think that it's way too early to make that kind of call. I think there's a lot of fighting left to go, and I'll stay with what we've said before. This is going to be long, it's going to be hard, it's going to be bloody, and at the end of the day, we'll see where the Ukrainians end up vis-a-vis the Russians.
And Eders, let me just tag on to what the chairman said. I absolutely agree with everything the chairman said. But I would remind you that this is not over. We continue to generate combat power, training and equipping 3 brigades in Germany right now, and there's other training ongoing around the region, as the chairman pointed out earlier. Countries continue to provide platforms. We talked about the additional Leopards and infantry fighting vehicles that are on the horizon, as well as artillery pieces. And so we're going to continue to generate combat power. We're going to continue to push in additional Bradley fighting vehicles and also Strykers and artillery pieces, and you heard the chairman mention that earlier. So our work continues, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that Ukrainians can be successful.
All right, thank you. Third question will go to Missy Ryan at the Washington Post.
I have 2 Ukraine-related questions following up on Idris's. First, Secretary Austin, for you, I wanted to follow up on the G7 statement that came out last week regarding the framework for providing security assurances to Ukraine. President Biden has publicly referenced the Israel MOU model. Do you believe that, is there a possibility that the United States could help Ukraine achieve or secure some sort of parallel qualitative military edge, or could the United States provide a mutual defense agreement to Ukraine as part of that security assurance? And do you expect that it's politically feasible to have the kind of agreement that we have with Israel for Ukraine? And then for you, Chairman Milley, Ukrainian military leaders have said how grateful they are for U.S. support, but at the same time, the various leaders, including General Zaluzhny, who you talk to regularly, have said that they don't think it's reasonable for the United States to be, for Ukraine, to be conducting this kind of major offensive, and especially do combined arms maneuvers without the ability to have greater air power and provide air support to the troops. And they say, NATO would never dream of asking its forces to do that, even given the Russian air defense system that's there. What is your response to that? And can you help us sort of walk us through your thinking about why Ukraine is able and should be able to conduct this offensive without the greater air power that some of the Ukrainian leaders are asking for? Thank you.
Thanks, Missy. I counted about 12 questions, but we'll do our best to get to. First, on the agreement with Ukraine, we can expect, and you saw evidence of this with the G7 announcement at the end of the Vilnius summit, we can expect that countries will execute bilateral agreements with Ukraine going forward, and certainly we will as well. And that's a work in progress. But I would tell you, our part of that, the chairman and I are focused on not only making sure that Ukraine has what it needs to be successful today, but we also have to make sure that they have a capability to defend themselves in the future and to deter aggression in the future. So while we're doing what's necessary to make sure that they can be successful today, we're also going to have to work with allies and partners to build a future force. And so that's a hard work that's got to happen. And right now we're kind of at that point where we're doing both simultaneously. So you see that in some cases we've invested in some things that because they have to be produced, they won't materialize until a couple of months down the road, or in some cases a year down the road. But those kinds of things help provide the capability that Ukraine is going to need in the future. So the core of any agreement will be their ability to defend themselves and deter aggression. They've got to have the combat power to do that, and that's what we're focused on. And then around that, the bilateral agreement will certainly be formed. And this is going to have to be work that nations take on together, not one nation alone. And so I look forward to working with my colleagues and working with state and other foreign ministers to develop the way ahead for Ukraine.
So Missy, I offered two things. One is, what's the military problem to solve here with the air power? And it's control of the airspace. And you can do that two ways. You can do that air to air, or you can do that from the ground to the air. In terms of the most effective and efficient and cost-effective way to do that right now for the Ukrainians is from ground to air, through air defense systems. And that's what they've been provided from the beginning of this war till now. And that's important because what you want to do is protect those assault forces from Russian close air support and or attack helicopter support. And they've got air defense systems, the Ukrainians do, that can do that. The casualties that the Ukrainians are suffering on this offensive are not so much from Russian air power, they're from minefields. Minefields that are covered with direct fire from anti-tank hunter killer teams, that sort of thing. So it's minefields. So the problem to solve is minefields, not the air piece right this minute. And that's what the coalition is trying to provide them, additional mine clearing, MICLICs, line charges, Bangalores, that sort of thing, in order to continue to work their way through the minefields. So I'm confident that they can do this, and especially if they execute the tactics, techniques, and procedures that they've been taught, which they are doing, and execute these operations at night, which would deny the Russians the ability to use any of their air power anyway. So the real problem is the minefields. It's not right now the air power. Now, having said that, just do a quick math drill here. 10 F-16s are $2 billion. So the Russians have hundreds of fourth and fifth generation airframes. So if they're going to try to match the Russians 1-for-1 or even 2-to-1, you're talking about a large number of aircraft. That's going to take years to train the pilots, years to do the maintenance and sustainment, years to generate that degree of financial support to do that. You're talking way more billions of dollars than has already been generated. So the key thing is to focus on air defense, focus on the blocking and tackling sort of offensive combined arms maneuver, which is artillery, at both long-range and short-range artillery, and then get in your engineers and your mine-breaching equipment. That's the kind of stuff they need. That's what they want. That's what they're asking for. When I talk to Zaluzny, that's what he's asking for. So,
final question, I'll go to Jennifer Griffin with Fox News.
Thank you. Defense Secretary Austin, I'd like to ask you about Senator Tuberville's hold on military nominations. Are you prepared to meet him halfway? And isn't the current policy in violation of the spirit of the Hyde Amendment? Even if technically you're not paying for abortions, you're paying for travel for potential abortions. And General Milley, you say that you have enough assets in the Middle East to counter Russia, to deter Russia, but last week Russian planes loitered over the Atamf base where U.S. military personnel are based, and just today, almost daily, they are countering U.S. military aircraft, including a manned aircraft today. Why can't you deter Russia in the Middle East?
Well, go ahead, Secretary, you can answer the first one. I'll take the second one.
Thanks, Chairman.
Way to go, Jen.
Jennifer, I think we have to keep things in perspective. 1 in 5 of my troops, our troops, are women. They don't get a chance to pick where they're assigned. They're serving their country. They're sacrificing each and every day. And they deserve, in my view, and in the view of our leadership, they deserve to have access to non-covered reproductive health care. And that's what this policy does. It focuses on health care, non-reproductive health care, which includes other things like IVF and some other things. So it's important that that our troops, our women, understand that we care about them, that we understand that they don't get a chance to choose where they're assigned, and so this policy helps them maintain access to that health care. The importance, the health and welfare of my troops is really, really important to me, and we're going to continue to do what's necessary to ensure that they have that access. And I know Senator Tuberville has said that it's illegal. It's not illegal, and we've made that point a number of times. We point to the fact that there's an opinion that's posted on the DOJ's public-facing website that really details this issue. And so this is a readiness issue. The fact that Senator Tuberville maintains this hold on the promotions of our senior officers, it cascades, it creates friction throughout the entire chain. It disadvantages families. You've heard us talk about the impact of that, and so I would ask Senator Tuberville to lift his hold. As you think about this, Jennifer, I would imagine our adversaries would look at something like this and be pretty happy that we create this kind of turbulence within our force.
So, Jennifer, as I said before, we have rules of engagement. Our pilots are extraordinarily well trained. They're empowered. The chains of command are empowered. The Secretary has granted the authorities necessary for them to defend themselves. If at any point in time any of our troops sense that there's a hostile act, a hostile intent, they will protect themselves. So that's point one. Secondly, if there's unsafe or unprofessional acts, that's a different issue. We try to work that out through the deconfliction channel that's done at the tactical level so that we don't have an inadvertent air-to-air accident or incident. But I am quite confident that General Kurilla and all the forces in CENTCOM know how to protect themselves and will protect themselves.
But it doesn't seem to be stopping the Russians.
well, it's not going to stop them from flying in the airspace, that's for sure. But if they're hostile act, hostile intent, or if they're acting unsafely or unprofessionally, then we'll work through that. But we will protect ourselves if there's any sort of challenge in that regard.
All right, thank you, Secretary Austin and General Milley. That's all the time we have. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, everybody.